What's up? Welcome in to today's episode of Pushing the Pile, brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Bryant McFadden joins the show today to break down all things AFC free agency. We're going team by team, division by division, and giving grades for how each team did, and basically what was, in my opinion, a fairly tame free agency period. B-Mac, how you doing today, though, brother?
Mike, I'm doing wonderful. It's a great day to be alive, so let's take advantage of it.
Yes, sir. We got 16 teams to cover, so let's dive right in to the AFC North. We'll start with the Baltimore Ravens, who, again, like I said, it was a fairly tame free agency period for a lot of teams. And although it's not over, the Ravens are one team that often takes advantage of that later parts of the free agency period. Think about the Jadeveon Clowney move a few years ago. They oftentimes get those guys who are cut by other teams who don't factor into the, compensatory pick formula. But their free agency period went a little something like this. They retained Ronnie Stanley. They started off with a bang, getting him done before the tampering period opened up, retained Patrick Ricard, retained Ben Cleveland, signed DeAndre Hopkins to a small deal. That was really the only notable one. And the only notable loss, Patrick McCarry, who was their versatile offensive lineman from a season ago. Well, they lost him to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So all those moves, B-Mac, what kind of grade do you give the Ravens free agency?
Yo, Mike, I gave the Ravens a B- so far during free agency. You talked about the big catch they needed to retain left tackle Ronnie Stanley. We all felt like he wasn't going to go anywhere, right? So that wasn't a surprising move in retaining his services. Patrick Ricard, you talked about the versatile, do-it-all offensive weapon for them. He's a huge plus. Losing Patrick McCarry, you talked about the versatility. He's very, very versatile. Lost him to Jacksonville. But outside of, Ronnie Stanley, Ben Cleveland, of course, I understand you brought in DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre is closer to the end of his career than the beginning. And you look at some of the other notable wide receivers that were free agents that are still clearly available. They went with the elder of the group. And I'm not saying, Mike, that D-Hop doesn't have any production left, because clearly he still has something left in the tank. But if you're the Baltimore Ravens, especially when it comes to the passing game, you want to become more explosive. You want to become, quicker. You want to become faster. I love Zay Flowers. Rashard Bateman had a heck of a year, but just adding more weaponry to your arsenal, I think would definitely improve the overall offense, because we know what you can do in running the football. So there lies the missed opportunity for me with the Baltimore Ravens. And that's why I gave him a B-.
Yeah, I went B. And it's B for business as usual, because this is just what the Ravens do. They don't go out. If you're expecting them to go out and sign that big name to put them over the edge, they've just never done business like that. They are going to develop from within, name a price for their guys that they want, and then go sign vets. They probably will not be done. They're probably one of the teams that's going to go sign a few guys in July that are going to plug holes throughout this roster, that are vets looking for a home. And then of those, sometimes you get a Kyle Van Noy who ends up being super productive for you over the course of the season. So in my opinion, this was always going to be the case for the Ravens. So getting Ronnie Stanley, that right there is a win in and of itself. But it's hard to see this putting them over the edge in the AFC. But truth be told, they were close last year. They were close enough that if they just retain, draft and develop well, they can still get themselves over the edge with really no additions necessary. Let's get to the Cincinnati Bengals, who were the talk of yesterday after retaining Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They also retained a lot of guys in this free agency period. B.J. Hill at defensive line, defensive tackle, Mike Gesicki at tight end, Joseph Asai at the edge position, amongst others. Signed to Darryl Slayton from the Green Bay Packers, nose tackle. Signed Samaje Perine, third down back. Didn't really lose anyone either. So for the Cincinnati Bengals, what kind of grade do you give their free agency period?
I gave the Cincinnati Bengals a C+, Mike. And I understand I might be a tough grader, but I gave them a C+, and here's why. When you franchise T. Higgins, he wasn't going anywhere, right? Unless someone gave you a haul that you're looking to receive to trade him. But T. Higgins was going to be in a Cincinnati Bengals uniform. Now, would he have showed up to everything organized that was mandatory? We don't know. But we were under the assumption that he would be a Cincinnati Bengal. Signing Jamar Chase was very, very important, and they got it done. Now, I was surprised to see them get both players signed, but I felt like going into this season, they would be a part of the Cincinnati Bengals based on the contracts and the tag. But outside of that, what was the issue for Cincinnati last year, Mike?
Defense.
So you basically release Sam Hubbard, who eventually retired. You're telling Trey Hendrickson, even though you're trying to work something out, that he can go seek for a trade. Those were your two best pass rushers. Trey Hendrickson had a heck of a year. He led the NFL in sacks, and you have nothing to show for it because your overall defense was bad. You talked about, B.J. Hill, no question. Having him back in as the anchor is huge. You talked about Slayton, from the Green Bay Packers, another, quality experienced guy. But how did you improve your defense? The second level and the third level. How? You didn't. So, yeah, you did a great job in making sure you retain your superstars on the offensive side. But in terms of your defense, we know if you don't have a defense, based on what we saw last year, your offense can be unbelievable. You're still not going to win the meaningful games that you need to win. So I'm thinking I was looking to see Cincinnati try to improve the weakness of their team. They made sure they kept the offense intact, but what significant improvements have they done to the defense that you look at and say, that's going to help them. That's going to get them over the hump. So that's why I gave them a C+, because we know your offense can score. Heck, they were scoring points when T. Higgins was injured last year, and you only had Jamar Chase, right? So we know what they can do offensively. Yeah, your offense will have to outscore people once again. So that C+ is for me.
See, for me, I just love that they got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins re-signed. I think keeping that intact keeps you in every game. And obviously the defense in its form a year ago was an atrocity. But the problem they're in is all their top draft picks the last 3 years have been on defense. So if you say, we need a corner, our cornerback group wasn't good enough last year. Well, you have 2 second-rounders and a first-rounder slotted to start at corner next year, who are all within their first 3 years in the league. Are you just going to kick those guys to the curb? I mean, maybe. Dax Hill obviously coming off an ACL, but he was probably your lone, bright spot from a season ago. So yeah, you could go out and sign guys. You have two, big money guys at linebacker, and Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson. So you're not going to go out and sign another linebacker. You just signed a big money free agent last year at safety in Geno Stone, and we saw how that worked out. And then you have Jordan Battle, who was a third rounder just a couple of years ago at safety. So it's you just need these guys to play better, unfortunately. So I think this was not the year. I think defensive line is where I would have invested resources, and they kind of did with TJ Slayton, but it just wasn't going to be a free agency period for them, given that all the contracts they have to resign. But the biggest thing is getting those two deals done and getting the Hendrickson deal done. If they get the Hendrickson deal done, to me, it's an A, because
they can get that
last year, the problem was the locker room. You had a completely divided locker room week one. You had these guys showing up for that Patriots game, not wanting to play because they all wanted new contracts. And I think in retrospect, they missed the boat on not getting those deals done at that point in time for all three of those guys. Because all three, T. Higgins had the injuries, but all three balled out when they're on the football field last year. And so the price only went up. But I do think this year, getting all those done, that's your window. That's what matters. The ancillary pieces, they just need to develop better. If those guys don't develop, if those guys that you all drafted don't take a step forward, you were toast in the first place, in my opinion.
Yep.
So I went A. All right, Cleveland Browns. A little quiet free agency period, obviously, because they had to re-sign Myles Garrett. They did that, made him the highest paid player at the time. Obviously, Jamar Chase just topped that contract, but 4 years, $160 million. Traded for Kenny Pickett from the Philadelphia Eagles. Signed Malik Collins, Cornelius Lucas, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Devin Bush, your who's who of former first rounders on the defense side of the ball. And didn't really lose anyone. Now, Jedrick Wills still out there. Their left tackle, former first rounder. Jameis Winston still out there. We'll see. What kind of grade do you give the Browns in their free agency period?
D+.
Ooh.
I gave him a D+. The first thing you stated when you went into this Cleveland Browns segment was they've been very, very quiet. That's what you said, right?
I did.
They've been very, very quiet. I don't disagree with you. I think we all would agree with you, Mike. The Cleveland Browns have been quiet. Myles Garrett, wanted to be traded. You were able to sign Myles Garrett. Great. We know who Myles Garrett is. And even if you traded Myles Garrett, you was going to get a significant haul for him to help your team in terms of quantity, right? Now you got to turn those quantity like picks into quality. We don't know. But you kept Myles Garrett. Kudos, Cleveland. Outside of that, there lies the quietness. For a team that only won 3 games, right? Last year, Mike, 3-14. You have no reason to be quiet during free agency. You have no reason. We just talked about 2 other teams that's in the Cleveland Browns division in the AFC North. Were those teams quiet as the Cleveland Browns? No. And get this, Mike, they had a better record in 2024, but they've made more noise during free agency than the Cleveland Browns. So if you're Kevin Stefanski, and let's keep it real, the elephant in the room, if you're Kevin Stefanski, if you lay another egg, you're probably going to be on the outside looking in as they get ready for 2026. It's safe to say. So outside of retaining Myles Garrett, the biggest notable free agent signing is trading for Kenny Pickett. I would say, I could be wrong, but my opinion is that has been the biggest notable signing for the Cleveland Browns. And you traded for Kenny Pickett. So if that is the biggest notable signing, I'm sorry, I got a D+ is where I have them, Mike. Talk to me. Let me know how you feel. But that's how I feel. When you're a bad team, you have no reason to be quiet when you have an opportunity to improve your roster to some degree. That's how I look at the offseason regimen in terms of the NFL and free agency. They were a bad team. They're too quiet.
The Browns you said they had no reason to be quiet. They had 81.6 million reasons, and that's Deshaun Watson's cap hit in 2026, unfortunately. That's where they're at. Is the bed they made is this god-awful quarterback contract that they cannot get off the books. He is going to cost them over $160 million over the next few seasons on the cap, just because that money was guaranteed. They took a big risk, and it blew up in their face. And so, unfortunately, they have to sign budget deals. And the thing is, I kind of like their budget deals. Malik Collins, I think, is a good interior pass rusher that adds to them. And Cornelius Lucas is a competent backup swing tackle. I think Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is a former first rounder that's worth taking a chance on at the price point that he signed for. So for all those reasons, I give it a B. And I think the Kenny Pickett move is a low risk 5th round pick. You swap Dorian Thompson-Robinson for him. Low risk, potentially could be your starter next year for that team. But there was no dollars to be had here. It was either sign Myles Garrett or go sign other people. And in that equation, I think I'm signing Myles Garrett, right? B-Mac, Myles Garrett for 40, or go out and sign a few other free agents and trade him. I think I would have signed Myles Garrett. So.
Hey, and great point by you. The problem is they utilized money years ago in a quarterback that has tied up everything. But guess what? That's a Cleveland Browns issue. That's a problem they created. That's a problem they created. That's Cleveland Browns doing Cleveland Browns-like things. And that's why you're right. They have been as quiet as they've been because they have to, but that's part of the problem. You keep making wrong decisions that you're still paying the price for right now. And I'll say this, when you look at free agency, fans want to be optimistic and believe that because we did this, we did that, we have a better chance in this upcoming season. But but think about this, Mike. If you're a Cleveland Browns fan and you just saw what you saw in 2024, how are you feeling going into 2025? Right now, just based on free agency.
No, not great. And also, your one saving grace is you hold pick 2. Pick 2 could be valuable. Pick 2 could be a home run. So that's your one saving grace. But free agency, your roster is it's uncomfortably the back end of the AFC North.
Think about it, Mike. You're a Green Bay Packer fan, but just imagine if you were a Cleveland Browns fan and you're sitting how you're sitting right now, looking at what you did in free agency. Thank you. That's why they get a D+. That's why.
Fair enough. All right, let's get to your Pittsburgh Steelers. They made the big move on the eve of free agency, DK Metcalf trade for a second rounder. That was the big one. Signed, they were a little bit quieter in signing free agents, signed Darius Slay, Mason Rudolph, Malik Harrison, the linebacker, Donald Parham, the tight end. They lost James Daniels, interior offensive lineman, who had an Achilles tear last year, Dan Moore, their left tackle, Justin Fields, Najee Harris, Dante Jackson, a lot of guys walking out that door. So for that reason, B-Mac, what is your grade for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I gave them a B+. The big notable signing, finding a way to go get a wide receiver one in alpha in DK Metcalf. Of course, when he was available, we felt like he would be moved. But Mike, the last few years, it felt like Pittsburgh they were missing on wide receiver ones. They've been trying, but they've been missing. So to see this finally become a reality for the Pittsburgh Steelers and a guy who's still in the prime of his career, only 27 years old, and you gave him a contract extension. So this isn't a short-term rental. This is longer than what he had left on his contract. You have to like this for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Instantly, your offense became better. Now, you look at bringing in a guy like Darius Slay. He's 34 years old, but he's still playing really, really good football for a guy of his age, not to mention what he brings in terms of the mentorship throughout the entire cornerback room and just having that championship pedigree and experience. That's huge. I can tell you a signing that I really, really like, and it's under the radar, bringing in Kenneth Gainwell. He's a guy who's been playing some really, really good football throughout his early professional career for the Eagles. He's not a starter. He's not coming to be your starter. But in terms of a third down option, a guy that can kind of spill the starter in the way his running style. He's a smaller guy by stature, but he plays bigger. And he really had a lot of successful, moments with the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's an under the radar signing that I really like. So I'm really loving what I'm seeing from the Pittsburgh Steelers. The reason that the thing that kept them out of potentially getting into that A category, don't have a quarterback. You have yet to make a free agent move in terms of a quarterback. You lost your guy. You haven't brought anybody in. But outside of that, everything they've done so far, really have enjoyed seeing. And also Brandon Echols from the Jets, a scrappy corner. We lost Dante Jackson. You bring in Darius Slay. Echols is a very, very scrappy, quick, potential inside-like corner. Now you add more depth to the cornerback room also, along with Darius Slay.
Yeah, I went incomplete because what you mentioned there, the quarterback position. Yeah. If you're rolling in right now with Mason Rudolph, that ain't good enough. And so we'll see what they end up doing there. But I think I'd be in lockstep with you in terms of a B+ grade with what they've done right now, because I love the DK Metcalf move. Yeah. I think, people talk about, him and Pickens' skill set being similar. 2X wide receivers isn't a bad thing to have. Two guys that can get down the football field and win on the vertical tree, especially with what, Arthur Smith wants to do offensively. That's kind of like what he had in the Tennessee Titans when they had A.J. Brown and when they had Corey Davis. It's two guys that can run those deep digs, those in-breakers that they love so much off of play action, that offense. So to me, I love pairing those two guys together. If you have a shorter corner, if you have a smaller corner, he's getting picked on if you're facing the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I like that move. It was one of my favorites this free agency period. And I think all their losses are guys I would have let walk out the door. I don't think re-signing Najee Harris was a priority. I don't think Dan Moore was going to command I was paying anywhere near what he ended up getting. And you drafted two tackles in the first round the past couple of years to deal with that. So the only thing is, how do they get over the hump, right? They are firmly still behind the Baltimore Ravens and kind of have been in that division for a little bit here. How did they get over the Baltimore Ravens? It's going to have to happen at the quarterback position. That's where it's going to have to happen. How they're going to get there, a big TBD at this point, and that's why I went incomplete. But I do think, at the end of the day, I like what they did so far, and given where they were in a cap situation, a lot of good moves. All right, we're going to take a quick break. After that, going to get to the AFC South and the AFC East right after this.
We dig it. Do you? The Pro Volleyball Federation on CBS Sports Network.
All right, AFC South, Houston Texans, one of, if not the most active team in this free agency period, not just through signings, but through some trades. They traded for C.J. Gardner-Johnson with the Philadelphia Eagles, traded away Kenyon Green, their former first-rounder at guard. They traded away Laramie Tunsil, their starting left tackle, and then traded for Ed Ingram, the Minnesota Vikings guard, who's a former second-rounder, also traded for Christian Kirk, former Jaguars wide receiver. Retained a few names: Mario Edwards, Derek Barnett, Dara Gumbawale, Jake Hansen. Signed a few budget guys: Traymon Smith, Nick Neiman, Sheldon Rankins, Darrell Taylor, Laken Tomlinson, Braxton Berrios. A hodgepodge of names there. What say you on this Texans free agency period?
I gave the Texans a C, right? I gave them a C. I love, bringing in Christian Kirk. You were able to rework his deal a little bit to save some money. Not to mention you got him from a divisional foe. So I don't know what Jacksonville is thinking right now, trading a reliable option to a team in your division that clearly needs wide receiver production, and they hurt in terms of depth. But I love that move. Bringing in C.J. Gardner-Johnson, I didn't think that was a necessity when you look at the safety play they had last year in the secondary. But they lost, a few guys. So, of course, bringing in and what he brings in terms of the emotions and just the mentality would help. But the thing that made me keep the Texans in that C category was the issue for them a year ago was their offensive line play, right? I mean, a young quarterback, C.J. Stroud, I think he was sacked almost on 40% of his dropbacks. He was pressured on almost 40% of his dropbacks. He was sacked 54 times. I think that was top 3 in the National Football League. You traded away your best offensive lineman that was a part of a unit that wasn't really, really good in terms of Laramie Tunsil. That was surprising. Yes, you got a nice haul in return, but that left tackle spot is very, very important. And if you look at the difference between C.J. Stroud's rookie year and his sophomore year, Mike, it was solely because the inability to get protected the right way that we kind of saw a lapse in production and consistency. Because when he's been protected, he's shown the ability to carve up defenses week in and week out. And guess who played a big part in that? Laramie Tunsil. And then you also traded in, you talked about Kenyon Green, who didn't have a really, really good year, but the potential is still there. There's a reason. Think about this, Mike. There's a reason that Howie Roseman decided to let Mekhi Becton walk, decided to trade a impactful defensive back for Kenyon Green. Because this wasn't like C.J. Gardner-Johnson didn't play really, really good football for Philly, but there's a reason why Howie saw Kenyon Green and say, you know what? We want him because there's something in him that they believe they can unlock. And for the Texans, they just ran out of patience and they just traded away 2 starters. And one starter was the best guy on their line to get in new guys to hopefully improve their offensive line. That's confusing for me. That's why I gave them a C.
They did get a haul, though.
They did. They did.
A second and a third over the next couple of seasons. That will obviously go a long way towards rebuilding. But here's the thing. This was kind of the window, right? This is heading into the prime of C.J. Stroud, the cheap years that you're thinking is a Super Bowl. And it's not necessarily that they lost those guys. It's that they backfilled with guys who I think are even worse. Laken Tomlinson at this point in his career, ask Seahawks fans, that is not a guy you want starting for you. Ed Ingram, there's a reason the Vikings were more than happy to let him get out the door as a former second rounder. He had not lived up to that billing. Like you are not upgrading this offensive line with those moves, unfortunately. And as much as, you kind of planned for this, and I think there's a reason why 2 teams were willing to trade away a franchise left tackle in Laramie Tunsil, because, right, this happened before with the Miami Dolphins, that they traded him away. But Blake Fisher did not inspire confidence in me last year to think that all of a sudden my tackle position is going to be fine. So it could be worse before it gets better. And if it's worse next year, you burned another prime year of C.J. Stroud in your championship window. Now, I do think this defense is awesome. And the C.J. Gardner-Johnson trade kind of fixes probably their biggest weakness defensively from a year ago, which was just coverage bust at the safety position. But I'm worried. I'm worried about CH Ryan. I'm worried about his health, man. Someone protect that man. So I gave him a C+. I went C+.
Yep.
All right, Indianapolis Colts.
All right, for the Colts. Yeah, I really like what the Colts have done under the radar signings. I gave them a B+, Mike. I gave them a B+. One of the issues for their defense was the pass defense. They were a bottom third pass defense last year. They were giving up so many, splash plays and just wasn't being stout. So guess what they went out and did? They went and got 2 legit day one starters in Cam Bynum, who's really been a very, very impactful player for the Minnesota Vikings over the last few years, not just in turnovers, creating turnovers, but just the communication, right? He's like the ultimate traffic cop in the back of the off defense, making sure everyone is lined up and communicating. Then you went and got in Travarius Ward, a CB1 from San Francisco. Now, he was dealing with a lot a year ago with the San Francisco 49ers, a lot of things off the football field, but we know he is a legit guy in terms of what he does in coverage, not to mention the leadership that he could bring to the secondary. And then the final under the radar signing that I really, really love outside of, what they retained from some of the players that were free agents, Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is finally living in the neighborhood where he is supposed to live. And what I mean when I say that, they gave him a 1-year deal around $14 million, right? To come in and compete. That's the neighborhood he needs to be living in because the expectations are not $40 million worth of expectations. The expectations are not franchise-like quarterback production. No, this is about showing us that you could once again become a starter. So this is a great situation because in terms of the backup role, they have improved in that element, and hopefully they will improve in terms of the starter element as well. So when you look at those just major signings for me, I gave the Colts a B+.
Oh, the team that, no surprise, the team that signs a bunch of DBs gets your highest grade so far, I believe. But I love their signings, man. I love these DB signings. Cam Bynum is one of my favorite under-the-radar signings of this free agency period. I think his versatility at safety is awesome. He was a college corner out at Cal. It was like a cover 2 corner there. They moved him to safety, and he flourished. I think he's a massive upgrade for them at that position. And then Charvarius Ward's a massive upgrade for them at the corner position.
Yes. Yeah.
It kind of gives them options where, you drafted Juju Brents highly in the 2nd round, top 50 guy, has had injuries over the course of his career so far, just hasn't been able to stay on the football field. Now, Jalen Jones, I thought, played well, but he was still a 7th rounder and not necessarily the athlete that you trust out there consistently in man coverage. So this gives you options. This gives you competition at that position. It just gives you depth at the corner position where they were so bad a season ago. So I don't think this necessarily boosts them, puts them over any hump. I still think they're looking up at the Texans, but it at least puts them in a situation where if Anthony Richardson takes a step forward, big step forward, which he needs to, and he'll be pushed by signing a guy like Daniel Jones to really be on his P's and Q's this upcoming season that, I gave it an A-. Obviously, the 2 big losses, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly along the offensive line. Fries didn't play last year, and Kelly was probably your weakest link along your offensive line at this stage in his career. It's still a damn good offensive line with Raymond, with Nelson, with Braden Smith getting retained there at right tackle. So I'm not going to complain too much about this Colts free agency period. I thought they did what they needed to do. Let's get to the Jacksonville Jaguars, where relatively tame. They signed a lot of budget guys. Patrick McCarry, offensive line. Jordan Lewis at corner to be their slot. Eric Murray at safety. Robert Hainsey to probably be their center. De'Ami Brown to be what looks like probably their wide receiver 2 at the moment. And then they lost, obviously, the Christian Kirk to the Houston Texans. Andre Cisco goes to the New York Jets. What say you about this Jaguars free agency period?
I gave Jacksonville Duval. I gave them a B-, Mike. I really gave them a B-. I really like, some of the things you talked about adding, significant players on the offensive line and trying to improve that element of Patrick McCarry, big time signer on the offensive line. I love his versatility. Adding Jordan Lewis in the secondary, just to command the nickel spot. I think he's really going to be a big time addition for their secondary. Eric Murray as well. Brown from Washington. And you look at where he fits, it's almost like, they're adding more talent to what they already have. Brian Thomas is wide receiver 1. Now it's about who will be wide receiver 2. It could be Brown or it could be Gabe Davis, who they gave some money to from the Buffalo Bills over a year ago, during free agency. So you add Johnny Munt, more of a depth situation, the tight end position, not really going to do too much there. Same can be said for Hunter Long. But overall, when you look at some of the players they lost and what they brought in, I really believe they improved. I really believe they improved. So I gave him a B-.
I went straight A for Jacksonville Jaguars. This, to me, is how good teams operate in free agency. You don't go out and sign, one big 5-year, $100 million deal and expect it to fix everything. You go out and say, I have a hole at right guard. Let me get a guy who's capable of starting at right guard. Patrick McCarry. I have a hole at the slot cornerback position. Let me get a guy who can go and be capable of starting at slot corner position. I don't need to pay, again, $20 million for that. And they didn't with a guy like Jordan Lewis. They got a center and Robert Hainsey, like guys who can play at the NFL level. And it didn't cost them that much to do it. They didn't sign a single guy who cost them as much as Gabe Davis did last year. And Gabe Davis didn't do a darn thing. So last year, you just look at the moves they made, throwing all this money at Eric Armstead, all this money at Gabe Davis, getting zero in return.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to pay bigger dividends, in my opinion. Even the De'Ami Brown move cost less again than Gabe Davis did. I think he's a better wide receiver. I think he's their wide receiver too from day one. So all that being said, James Gladstone, his very first, free agency period, I got to give it an A. This is just what you need to do. This is how better teams operate. Less money being guaranteed, less money being outlaid that you're committed to, and more having to build from within. So Jacksonville, love what they've done so far with that new regime. All right, Tennessee Titans. This one's going to be a little bit different. They went out, just to set the seat here, they went out and signed Dan Moore for 4 years, over $80 million. Signed Kevin Zeitler. Signed Cody Barton. Signed Van Jefferson. Signed Xavier Woods at safety. Signed a punter and Johnny Hecker. They just released Chidobe Awuzie over the weekend. Obviously, this all comes after what was the biggest spending spree in team history a year ago. Awuzie was one of those in the big spending spree. He's already gone now a year later. What do you think of this Titans free agency period under new GM Mike Bergonzi?
I gave them a C, Mike. I gave them a C. Their big significant signing was Dan Moore. We knew he was going to get a nice payday. No one thought he was going to receive what he got from Tennessee, right? That was surprising.
Yeah.
Now, will it live up to the billing? We got to wait and see. But as of right now, he is enjoying the fruits of his labor. Kevin Zeitler, experienced guy. Hopefully he has some more tread left on the tires to command the guard spot. Brought in Van Jefferson. That's an area of concern for me because whoever your quarterback is probably going to be a young guy. You got Calvin Ridley, but who else? Who else? Think about this, Mike. Think about all the valuable wide receivers that were available and that's still available via free agency. And you didn't have to really give them a handsome ransom, a lot of money, and they have experience. So I look at it like this for Tennessee. You're a bad team a year ago. You were the worst team. You have the number one pick, which is a plus. If you utilize that number one pick on a young quarterback who will potentially probably will be your day one starter, right? How have you helped him in the passing game? In a year where you had money available and there were options available and you just decided to settle for Van Jefferson. And don't forget, you still have Treylon Burks, so take your poison. Who was number 2 behind Calvin Ridley?
Gosh. I mean, it's probably Van Jefferson, which he hasn't been a number 2 at any point in his career, unfortunately. So, yeah, I don't know. I gave him a C-. I did not. The Dan Moore signing was maybe my least favorite of all free agency. And not only does he go in at left tackle, you're moving the guy who you just drafted number 7 overall a year ago.
JC?
You're moving him to the right side. It's like, yeah, that's where he played in college, but why didn't you stick him there to start with? Now you're flipping the guy 1 year into his NFL career, for
was a wasted year. They wasted
wasting a year of development in terms of.
Should have kept him on the right side from jump.
So, man, those are just compounding bad decisions, unfortunately, for the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
And their offensive line is better on paper, but there's a reason Zeitler was cheap. He's very old at this point in time. Going to be 35 this upcoming season. That's a big risk to take. And while that's my favorite signing of theirs, this does not put you over the hump. This does not make whoever's walking in to this quarterback situation. This doesn't make it a quarterback friendly situation. And because of all that, when you had all this space over the last 2 years to put a good situation around a quarterback, you still don't have it. You still don't have it. And so for the Tennessee Titans, unfortunately, my lowest grade so far. All right, Buffalo Bills, a team that's been, Brandon Beane has built a lot of that roster. A lot of their best teams were built off the backs of free agency, off of the moves of elsewhere. But the money's kind of drying up there. This year's free agency period was mainly about retaining. Retain Josh Allen, retain Greg Rousseau, retain Terrell Bernard, retain DeMar Hamlin, Ty Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Signed a couple of budget guys, Josh Palmer, Michael Hoyt, Joey Bosa, with all his injuries, only came fairly cheap at 1 year's $10 million, $12 million. Larry Ogunjobi as well. So no real big names. What do you think? What kind of grade would you give this free agency period for the Buffalo Bills?
I gave them a B, Mike. Great job by Brandon Beane retaining some really, really significant contributors for their team. Doing right by those players was definitely important, especially the homegrown guys they drafted, and they have earned the extension they received. So that was a plus. The Josh Palmer signing over $30 million, I was a bit surprised. Clearly, it was a very, very, deep wide receiver class in free agency, and it was almost like it was a traffic jam of light players. And they went and gave Josh Palmer $30+ million. I didn't see that happening, but potential is there, especially playing with a guy like Josh Allen. So let's see how that play out. The thing that kept them in this B category for me, the Joey Bosa signing, we got to wait and see, to be determined. He's been oftentimes injured, hasn't really lived up to the billing of the player he became early on in his career because of injuries. We have to wait and see. But one thing that really hurt their free agency class that I really thought could elevate them, you talked about signing Larry Ogunjobi and also Michael Hoyt from the Rams. Two significant pieces that add depth and experience to the defensive line, but they will be suspended the first 6 games.
Yeah.
That hurt. That hurt. If those guys were not suspended, they would have a better grade from me, because I really like those moves in what they added to depth on the defensive line and experience. You know what I mean? And they're role players, but they're really, really good role players when you look at everything else the Buffalo Bills have already on the defensive front. You know what I mean? So that's why I kept them in that B category, because when that news came out, it was like a gut punch. Like the Bills fans got punched in the gut, because he's like, what? 6 games? And that's a lot. That's a lot of games. So I gave him a B.
Sometimes, though, you love signing those guys because that means they're going to be at their peak performance, right? That means they were taking. When you take PEDs, that means they are, they're going to come back ready to rip. Is all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, the Buffalo Bills, I agree. I'm right there with you. B. It was kind of business as usual. This is how they operate in free agency. They sign vets who come cheaper. They sign guys who were starters elsewhere who aren't commanding big money deals. That's the Josh Palmer one. Wide receiver, though, I don't know what the plan is here, man. They also signed Laviska Shenault. So on their roster right now, you have Keon Coleman, Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Laviska Shenault, KJ Hamler, Jalen Virgil, Tyrell Shavers. Like they have a hodgepodge of wideouts where it's like, who plays what role? Who does? There's not really a defined, which, you have Josh Allen. To not have, a guy for him at wide receiver, and Keon Coleman based off his rookie season and just how just not well he got open consistently.
Yeah.
I don't see him developing into the guy at wide receiver. It's going to be tough. It's just, now obviously he played like an MVP and was the MVP without it, but your path is making this offense unstoppable, right? It's not going to be the backs of this defense. The defense is what it is at this point. You're too many pieces away from being an elite defense to really think that's going to be the case. But I don't think you're that far away from being an unstoppable offense. And I just don't think they've done it at the receiver position. And what worries me is they've signed so many guys that I don't think they're going to address it in the draft. Like, I don't think they're going to take another swing to try to find that guy. So
and this is a pretty deep wide receiver draft, as you know.
It is. So. Yeah. So we'll see. I gave him a B, though, because, again, not a lot of money. And I think they could have more dividends than what they ended up signing those guys for. All right, Miami Dolphins, who didn't have a ton of cap space to play with, right? They're kind of up against it. That's why they let Javon Holland, their second-round safety, one of the best safeties in the NFL, walk out the door to the New York Giants. They signed, though, James Daniels to play along the interior of that offensive line. Didn't come too expensive either, coming off that Achilles injury. Signed Zach Wilson, signed Larry Borum, signed Nick Westbrook-Akina, Ashton Davis. A lot of smaller deals. Obviously, they didn't have the money to play with. What do you think about this Dolphins free agency period?
I gave them a passing grade. I gave them a C-. That's a passing grade. Didn't have a lot to work with. It was low moves in trying to improve and develop. So more so their grade is about waiting and seeing how some of these low moves, come to light in terms of the development. Now, when you look at losing Javon Holland, that's a significant piece in my opinion, because throughout his 4 years in Miami, last year was his worst year. And there was a lot going on with the entire team. But when you look at what he did in his first 3 years, he was a talented guy. So you bring in Ashton Davis, who's never was known to be a significant starter. Potentially that's his role for him to try to fill. And it was just, very, very moderate moves. You know what I mean? So this is more about waiting and seeing what happened in terms of the development. But to your point, there wasn't a lot they could really do. So it was about, going and trying to be a bargain shopper and find the best bargain prices that we can get.
Yeah, I like the James Daniels move. Now, obviously, you're off Achilles. May not be his best season. But for that number, like year 2 and year 3 of that contract, you could be having a quality starter because that's what he had been. Prior to that, I gave him a C+, though, just because back-to-back seasons, your ideal scenarios when you draft guys in the top 50, Christian Wilkins and then Javon Holland, you just let them walk. They just walked out the door. You had home run picks, guys who were amongst the best at their respective positions, top 10 sort of players at their positions in the NFL. And you're like, sorry, just walk out the door. That to me is just not how I want to operate a franchise.
No,
I want
not losing both.
I want my guys who are first rounders coming in knowing that if I ball out for 3 seasons, I'm getting paid and I don't have to go anywhere else the rest of my career, right? I want to know that I will be taken care of. And now if you're drafted by Miami Dolphins this year, you just don't know that, right? Those guys did everything they possibly could for 4 and 5 seasons for the Miami Dolphins, and they just got their walking papers. And it sounds like the Dolphins weren't even just given their cap situations, weren't even attempting to get those guys back. And that, to me, again, that's why they get a C+ for me. New York Jets, who are active. This one, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this because they did a lot of interesting things. They obviously had some big losses. DJ Reed, their cornerback, walks out the door. Hassan Reddick as well, who maybe
Morgan
that's a good
Moses.
thing after that whole saga last year. Morgan Moses, their right tackle from a year ago that they signed, walks as well. Tyron Smith, still a free agent. We'll see what happens with him. Last year, though, unfortunately, looked like may have been his last. But they retained Jamian Sherwood, Isaiah Oliver, Tony Adams, some pieces to that defense, and signed Justin Fields at quarterback, Brandon Stevens at cornerback, Andre Sisco at safety, and then some budget signings in Josh Myers at center, Rashad Weaver off the edge, Chuka Okorafor at right tackle. So what do you think about this Jets free agency period that had a lot going on?
I gave them a B+. I gave the Jets a B+. They had a lot going on. Most importantly, got a quarterback. They got a quarterback, a guy who's 26 years old, highly, talented player. Potential is there. So that's a plus. You get your quarterback, a quarterback the organization was confident in believers of, and they went out and made him their guy. Great move. You got another starter in Brandon Stevens. I know some Baltimore Ravens fans was a bit annoyed sometime with him, but he's a scrappy guy. He doesn't turn down a battle. And you have to be a scrappy corner playing for Aaron Glenn, playing under Aaron Glenn as your head coach. So that's a starter. You got Andre Sisco, another starter, right? In the secondary, Andre Sisco is a very, very physical, imposing player that has a nose for the ball, and he doesn't mind sticking his face in the fan. So I love that as well. You talked about some under-the-radar signings with Weaver, Okafor, and things like that. They just added depth to an area they needed to add depth in. And bringing back Shorewood is a huge plus because he really earned the right to remain a Jet. You know what I mean? He's a guy that does things the right way. And it seems like his voice carries through the locker room, especially on the defensive side. So I give him a B+. Yeah,
I went B- for a couple of reasons. I love the Sherwood retaining him, But the thing was, like, for a 1-year starter, they really didn't get like the 1-year starter discount. They still paid him 3 years, $45 million, right? They paid him close to top of the market. So from that perspective, it's like, I like it, but still came a lot. Brandon Stevens to me was just a guy you don't want as one of your starting corners from what I saw on tape last year with the Baltimore Ravens. He was the weak link in that secondary more often than not. Andre Cisco signing I love, though. I think this is a guy that can pay off big dividends going to a better situation there, which is more talent around him because he has such good range on the back end. But it really is going to come down to the Justin Fields move. If he balls out, this is an A+, right? 2 years, $40 million is like a drop in the bucket for a starting quarterback in today's NFL. But, there's a reason 2 different other teams have given up on him at this point. And it's because just he keeps leaving you wanting more. So for the New York Jets, it's a chance. It's a swing of the bat. But I went B+ just because I've seen enough at this point that I'm not buying into the next step from him. But I'll be happy to be proven wrong if it does come. New England Patriots, last one in the AFC East. They had to have it because they had more cap space than anyone else in the NFL heading into this. And boy, did they blow through a good chunk of it, signing Milton Williams to over $100 million deal, Carlton Davis at corner, Harold Landry off the edge, reuniting with his head coach there, Robert Spillane at linebacker, Morgan Moses at right tackle, Mac Hollins at receiver, and then some budget signings in Josh Dobbs, Caleb Von Chason, Kyrus Tonga, Jalen Hawkins, Wes Schweitzer, and Marcus Epps. So the biggest, cash outlay of any team in the NFL. What'd you think of it?
I gave the New England Patriots an A. They had the most money, and they spent wisely, in my opinion. They weren't careless in how they were going about spending their dollars, which is a very, very important thing. You talked about areas of concern for their team a year ago on the defensive side. They could not put pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They were dead last in sacks, only 28 sacks. They were at the bottom of the barrel in the pressure rate, putting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. So what they did, went and got the most coveted interior defensive lineman, went and got one of the best corners that was available in Carlton Davis, went and got another surprise edge player who became available in Harold Landry, who Coach Vrabel has a relationship with because he coached him in Tennessee. Went out and got a 3-down linebacker in Robert Spillane, who's really earned every dollar he's earned in the National Football League. Went and got an experienced player to add to the offensive line in Morgan Moses. I love everything about what they've done. I really thought they would go out and get more of a bigger signing at wide receiver than Mac Hollins, but let's see exactly what they have the rest of the way, because clearly you want to add more explosive talent around your young quarterback in Drake May. But I know, hats off to New England. They did a great job in making their team better.
Yes, I went A-. I had no complaints about truly any of the signings. I think the numbers they got the guys too, I'm not going to haggle with. They had to do it. And I think the guys they added, this defense is going to have a lot more teeth this upcoming season. It's more just how much better is the offensive line and how much better is the skill position talent for Drake May. It's not at this point. And Morgan Moses at his age is 34 years old with injuries even a year ago, that not going to be not a guy I'm necessarily trusting is going to turn around my tackle issue. So at that point, you really are still rolling the dice hard here. The only thing keeping this from an A or an A+ is that your receiving core is like Kayshon Boutte, Jalen Polk, Demario Douglas next year, unless you draft some guy at number 4 overall. And they might, Travis Hunter might be their number 1 wide receiver next year, and this might be moot. Or, Armand Membu might be their starting left tackle next year and ball out, and this might be moot. But they had a lot of cash, and Drake May's life doesn't look a ton easier, is the only thing that I'm a little worried about keeping this from an A.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm right there with you. They should have improved that wide receiver room more so than what they've already done.
Problem was, though, just receiver class was just all vets, not a lot of guys who were, all the biggest ones, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins.
Yeah, they should have a second rounder for DK.
Compared to this year's class, we'll see. We'll see what they end up doing. Obviously, they could be drafting someone who ends up surpassing that. But yeah, Drake May's looking like, hey guys, what about me?
Exactly.
What about me here? All right, we're gonna take a quick break. After that, gonna do AFC West, and then some of our underrated and overrated moves that we loved in the AFC. Right after this.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
All right, Kansas City Chiefs. They were active. They retained Trey Smith, Nick Bolton, Hollywood Brown, Kareem Hunt, Juju Smith-Schuster. Went out and signed Gardner Minshew, Christian Fulton, Jalen Moore, Elijah Mitchell, Bailey Zappi, Jerry Tillery. And then they lost Justin Reed and Nuke Hopkins. What do you think of this Chiefs free agency period, B-Mac?
I gave the Chiefs a B. Mike, I gave them a B. Retaining Trey Smith was important. Nick Bolton, important. Hollywood Brown, you didn't get a full season with Hollywood Brown, so we never really got an opportunity to see what kind of magic he could create with Pat Mahomes. So bringing him back is huge. Kareem Hunt, he's a valuable guy in the backfield. He does things the right way. I love how he exists with Isaiah Pacheco. But I gave them a B because you traded away Joe Thuney a year ago, who was called to do a lot of different things and didn't complain. And he did fairly well in trying to keep the offensive line afloat. That was a surprising move because the last image we have of the Kansas City Chiefs was the offensive lineman not being able to block. Mm-hmm. And you traded away one of your best offensive linemen, one of your most versatile offensive linemen, and Joe. That was surprising. And outside of that, you look at some of the guys they brought in. Gardner Minshew depth behind Pat Mahomes. Christian Fulton kind of revitalized his career a year ago for the Chargers. Is that the consistent Christian Fulton that we will see? We have to remain, and we have to wait patiently for that. And you didn't really bring in, Jerry Tillery, former high-round pick by the Chargers. He's been moved around for quite a few times, still trying to find his stride. That could be a depth move. So, it didn't really give you any splash-like signings outside of – I think I'm more intrigued and excited about the players they retained than the players they brought in.
To me, it was just good business. I went A- for the Kansas City Chiefs. Because, moving on from Joe Thuney, probably, at his age, 33 years old, before it falls off, right? You're kind of getting something in return for a guy before it really goes downhill. And then, to me, Jalen Moore signing, if you just watch his tape from a year ago, I'm not so sure that Dan Moore, the guy who got the most money at the tackle position, probably twice as much on almost a per-year basis as Jalen did, I'm not sure he's better. I'm not sure he's the better Moore when watching those two prior for agency. So I do think that one is a very under-the-radar move that could pay off big dividends, and I think there's a reason why it happened like day one of free agency. They nabbed him, and I think he's their starting left tackle next season. Christian Fulton, I think, has been a quality, option at corner throughout his career. So just to get him in the fold, he's not an elite guy. He didn't sign like an elite guy, $10 million a year, but he's a guy that can start for you. Gives them a floor at that position. Yep. And then just the guys they prioritized, Trey Smith, Nick Bolton, those are heartbeat guys on both sides of the football, guys you wanted to retain. And again, when you draft guys and they hit the way they did, that's good business in my opinion. So yeah, A-. I think it's just kind of sets them up for continued to be where they're at. Obviously, they need to start hitting on some draft picks, unfortunately, the way they haven't the last couple seasons. But business as usual for the Kansas City Chiefs. I'd say the Chargers, who last year had one of the best free agency periods. They turned this around through a lot of budget signings that paid off big dividends on that defense. And who they got this year? Dante Jackson at corner. Mike Williams is back at wide receiver. Najee Harris at running back. Benjamin St. Juste comes over from the Washington Commanders. Naquan Jones, Deshaun Hand on the defensive interior. And then Mekhi Becton to probably slot in at right guard for them after his year of doing so for the Philadelphia Eagles, and only lost Christian Fulton, Poona Ford, Joey Bosa, Asante Samuel, and J.K. Dobbins still pending. So there's, I said only lost. There's actually a few guys there that were key players for them. So what are your thoughts on their free agency period?
This was hard for me. I was going back and forth. So Charger fans, please forgive me, but I gave them a C. And the primary reason, Mike, I gave them a C. You just talked about the players they lost, right? So let's do compare and contrast. You lost Christian Fulton, who played pretty good football for you, and you brought in Dante Jackson. I don't even know if that's a lateral move because Christian played better football than Dante last year. You lost Asante Samuel Jr., who was injured the majority of the year, but we've seen what he's done in his first 3 years, basically being a starter since day one. and really evolving. You lost Sante, and you brought in who did you bring in?
Benjamin St. Juste.
Yeah, from Washington. I don't know if that's a lateral move because I think Asante has played better football. You brought in Najee Harris, and it's looking like you're moving on from J.K. Dobbins. Najee has been a very, very durable, reliable player, but J.K. last year gave you splash, gave you burst, gave you explosive big playability, especially how he started the season. So is that a lateral move? I don't know. And then one area of concern for me, when you look at how they played the game and their success or the lack thereof, was outside of Ladd McConkey, you didn't have anybody, right? He played himself into being wide receiver one. Well, you brought in Jalen Reagor and Mike Williams. When you look at all the other wide receivers that are low bargain moves and the names and, of course, the potential, those are the guys you decided to try to improve your wide receiver room with. That's a wait-and-see move, but I feel more confident in Mike Williams than Jalen Reagor because Jalen Reagor's still been trying to figure things out. I mean, in terms of who you retain, you brought him back. So, and then also, too, think about it like this. The last thing I'll say, you brought back Jalen Reagor and you signed Mike Williams. Joshua Palmer, who you went and let go, granted he got a nice deal, I would say has been more proven over those two players in the last few years than what you brought in and what you retained. So it's a lot of, were these lateral moves or were these moves kind of going in the wrong direction?
Yeah, so last year when they let kind of all those guys walk out the door that were big names like Mike Williams, like Gerald Everett, I kind of thought like it was time. It was time to hit reset. Mm-hmm. Losing like Poona Ford, Christian Fulton, if they lose Asante Samuel Jr., it's like, I don't know. Those guys were kind of guys I would have wanted to retain.
Yes.
And going out and what they did sign. So I went C+ for the Chargers. Yeah. Just the saving grace here being, I like the Mekhi Becton move. You know, I think that 2 years, $20 million for him, not a lot of money, given how, last year's his very first year at guard, very first year on the right side, that he's a guy that immediately gives you a more formidable run game, and fits exactly what Greg Roman wants to do in that offense. So for that reason, you kind of the only saving grace, but I don't like a lot of their other moves, unfortunately.
I'm right there with
that's
you.
why I went C+.
And you talked about the Mekhi Becton signing. It's a good signing, but you're hoping that he can stay healthy like he did last year.
Yeah. That's why he signs for that, because the injuries throughout his career with the Jets were just
and then it's almost like why Philly didn't want him back. So, but hopefully he stays healthy, because if he can stay healthy, he will be a significant piece for everything they do on the offensive side. So that's a wait and see.
All right, Denver Broncos, who went out, and they were big players. That's what you can do when you have a rookie quarterback deal. Talanoa Hufanga, they signed, former all-pro safety from the San Francisco 49ers. Dre Greenlaw from the 49ers as well. Evan Ingram at tight end. Some lower down signings, Matt Pert, swing tackle. Trent Sherfield, wide receiver. Retained DJ Jones, Jarrett Stidham, Justin Strnad, and Mitchell Fraboni, their long snapper. Only lost Cody Barton at linebacker. So what do you think about this Broncos free agency period?
I love it, man. I gave them a B+, and I actually want to change my grade here live and give them an A, because as I really look back at everything they did, adding Evan Ingram, they had no tight end production last year for the young quarterback in Bo Nix at all. I'm talking about seam opportunities were not there. Now you got a guy that can work the seam. Now you got a guy that can move the chains for you. And it adds to your offense and helps your young quarterback become better. That's what you got to do when you have a young quarterback. Continue to add talent around him, which is a plus. Don't forget, Mike, this was already a very, very good defense a year ago. Well, they went out and got better. Hufanga, when he is healthy, he is baby Troy Polamalu. When he is healthy and he plays to that level with the energy and the passion, I love him. You get a motivated Dre Greenlaw back. And remember when he jumped into the lineup last year, he wasn't in football shape. He was still trying to figure things out. But now he has a full off season to work out and condition healthy. He adds to what you have already on the defensive side, and he brings a mentality of toughness and just bully-like ball, right? Physical nature. I love that, man. So, this is a team that made the playoffs last year, and most people feel like they, exceeded the expectations with a rookie quarterback. But you better look out for the Denver Broncos, because they got a real good value pick in the first round and continue to improve. And, man, if they hit on that first round selection, especially on the offensive side, Look out.
I think you hit the nail on the head. This was one of my favorite free agency periods of any team because they had this awesome defense a year ago, one of the best in the NFL, but had kind of a couple weaknesses. One was safeties that could come up and fill in the run game. Talanoa Hufanga comes up and fills the run game at an elite level. You know, when he's healthy, he is one of the best in the NFL to do just that. And then just range at the linebacker position. And Dre Greenlaw signs for a 3-year, $30 million deal that if he had never blown out that Achilles in that Super Bowl, and you're getting him now, 18 months post Achilles, which should be back to full strength. If he never does that, he's signing top of the market linebacker deal. He's coming in at what Zach Vaughn signed for, twice as much as the deal he got. So you may be getting a steal there. And I like the Evan Ingram signing as well, just getting an athlete at the tight end position to pair with your young quarterback. So it's just like need, value. I think they knocked it out the park with all three of those signings. Got to give them an A for all that. Broncos look like players now in the AFC West. All right, last team before we get to our underrated, overrated, and blockbuster moves we love. Las Vegas Raiders. They obviously made the big splash the Friday prior to free agency, trading for Geno Smith. They did more retaining than signing. Retained Max Crosby, extended him. Adam Butler, Malcolm Roach, they brought back. Signed Jeremy Chin, Alex Kappa, Lonnie Johnson, Eric Stokes, Raheem Mostert, but they did lose some big names here. Trayvon Merrick, the safety, Robert Spillane, and Divine Diablo, their linebackers. Nate Hobbs, their slot cornerback. So a lot of that back seven walking out the door, obviously with Patrick Graham there now as their DC once again. What do you think of this Raiders in their free agency period?
I gave the Raiders an A, Mike. I gave the Raiders an A. If you're Pete Carroll, you're 73 years old, you sign a 3-year deal, you have no time to wait and hope to develop a quarterback. Go get you a quarterback that you have a relationship with and you love what he does and he loves what you do as a coach. Now you got a guy who you don't need to develop. He's ready. Now that conundrum was answered, right? Now you brought back Max Crosby, gave him a new deal. He's already motivated. He's going to be highly motivated. You look at the defensive line, adding Adam Butler, you retain Michael Kuntz. Don't forget, Christian Wilkins is still a part of the Raiders. You just didn't see a lot of him because he got hurt early in the year. So this would be like his first year in the Raider uniform with the guys that you retain along with some of the additions. I love Jeremy Chin. Brought back the Jeremy Chin that we saw early on in his Carolina Panther career. A Swiss Army knife, can play on all three levels, did a great job for Washington. He parlayed that into a nice deal with the Raiders. I love that. Alex Kappa as well, veteran leadership in terms of experience. Man, they really got better. And don't forget, I know they lost Nate Hobbs, but Eric Stokes was a former first rounder. The potential was there. He just never figured everything out there in Green Bay. Now he gets a new opportunity with a new team with first round like talent. So he could be a guy that could be one of their starters in the back end, I think, as well. So, and you add speed with Raheem Mostert. I know he's still old. I mean, he's older in the tooth, right? But he still can run 4.4. Former track guy. And that was an area of concern for them because they had no running back production at all. At least he brings experience and he brings you the big playability because he's still faster than the average running backs.
Yeah, Chip Kelly loves speedbacks. Obviously, just featured one at Ohio State a year ago. I gave this one an A-. Getting Geno Smith pushed this one over the edge. I don't love how much they lost defensively. I think those are some good players they let walk out the door. It's going to be difficult to backfill all those guys in one off season, and especially when you just look at the quarterbacks in their division, right? You have Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and Bo Nix. I want my secondary to be better than it is right now for Las Vegas Raiders, but I love what they did with their defensive line, retaining Max Crosby, giving that extension to make him Raider for life, retaining Malcolm Kuntz, who was on trajectory to be a much, much higher paid player before tearing his ACL last offseason. And you hit the nail on the head. Christian Wilkins barely played last year too. This defensive line could be special if they can just stay healthy this year. So to keep it intact for one more year to run it back, I love. But it all really comes down to Geno Smith. To me, that was an awesome move. It kind of frees them up there at pick 6 to just add talent around him to this offense. So an A- for the Raiders. Another job well done offseason, in my opinion. All right, what was your most underrated move of any in the AFC?
My most underrated move is Justin Fields signing with the New York Jets. You looked at the money, great deal in terms of what the quarterback market is. And if you're the Jets, you potentially could have a steal in terms of what he could add to your team, especially the playmaker that he has with his athleticism. So I think that's one of the more underrated moves because the Jets been trying to figure out this quarterback thing for quite some time. It didn't work out well with Aaron Rodgers because of injuries and things like that. The other quarterbacks didn't work out well with, but you got a guy who does things the right way. You know, he keeps his mouth closed, doesn't say a lot, but he just goes about his business, and he's a hard worker, and he wants to show that he is a legit starter in the National Football League. And he adds another playmaker to their offense, in an offense that lacks playmakers. You know what I mean? That needs more playmakers. Mm-hmm. So I love that move for the Jets.
And I do think it immediately what it does is if they can get that offensive line, they really only have a right tackle. You only need their run game could be scary. Him and Breece Hall in that backfield.
Oh, no question.
You can just lean on that. You don't need much in the passing game. All right, my favorite underrated move. I'm gonna go with the Mekhi Becton deal because, again, last year was his first year at right guard, and he was already one of the better run blocking guards in the NFL. He goes to a scheme in Greg Roman's that is a gap-heavy scheme that's going to play to his strengths of just moving people off the line of scrimmage. And he gets to play next to Joe Alt in an offensive line now that could very well be a top 3 unit in the NFL next year with all that they have invested in it. And if that's the case, this is one of the best run block lines in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I fully expect them, we talked about how they haven't re-signed J.K. Dobbins. I think they're going to be in the market for a back in this draft class. I would imagine the first 3 rounds, they will take one, and it's a loaded draft class. All of a sudden, there are worries about who's catching passes from Justin Herbert. This is going to be a run-first team. They're going to run the football and run it very effectively. So to get him for 2 years, $20 million, yeah, I'm not – if I'm a defensive tackle in the AFC West, I'm a little upset about that. I don't love to see that guy walking through that door. What was the most overrated move of any in the AFC?
For me, it's Joey Bosa to Buffalo. And this is solely because the last time we saw Joey Bosa play a full season was 2021. We were wearing COVID masks then, right? Protecting ourselves, That's how long it's been since he played a full season. He's been more injured than healthy. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, you're banking on him staying healthy, which is something he hasn't been able to do in quite some time. And then even a year ago, he played in 14 games, but he only had 5 sacks. So the sack production wasn't there when he was in the lineup more than none. So those are 2 things that you have to be overly concerned with, because when you bring him into Buffalo, granted, it's a great deal. It's a great deal for definitely for Buffalo. You're saying we need you to be able to be a catalyst for our team. Not to mention Larry Ogunjobi, your other free agent signing, and Michael Hoyt. They're going to miss the first 6 ball games. So you really need Joey to be in his bag and most importantly, be healthy. But do we believe he can stay healthy for the entirety of this season? That's something you don't want to roll the dice on. So that's my most overrated move, because it makes sense when you think about the name and what we've seen from him. But then when you really dissect and look at what he's done over the last 3 or 4 years, it's like, man, this man has been more on the sideline than on the football field. And if you're Buffalo, you're making this move because you need to go hunt guys like Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. And if you're going to have success against them, you need to have Joey Bosa in the lineup.
Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing is, it feels like Joey Bosa should be like mid-30s. He's only 29.
Only 29.
30 this offseason, but man, his injuries really have derailed what was a promising career for him. All right, my most overrated move. It's got to be Dan Moore to the Tennessee Titans. I'm not sure anyone's rating it highly, but I could not rate it lower, because you paid him 4 years, $82 million. And it's not even like, I thought maybe it's like a fake 4 years, $82 million where it's kind of like a pay as you go. It's not really. No. They are on the hook for, after 2 years, $50 million for him. There's no easy out for this contract. They are banking on him being their starting left tackle for 4 years, $82 million. And he's going to be 27 years old this fall. Next season, he is 27 years old. It's not like this is a 24-year-old who came in the NFL early that maybe you're banking on a next step coming out of him. I think what you see is what you get. And what you're seeing is a guy who led the NFL in sacks allowed last year. That to me is just
that's not good.
I cringe thinking about that for the Tennessee Titans and their fan base. But yeah, I mean, it feels like they made these moves last year where they just started spending money recklessly. I thought this year they'd be a little more conservative. This was just not a deal I liked, in my opinion, unfortunately.
I agree.
All right. Favorite blockbuster move. Which was the one that caught your eye, D-Mac?
Well, it wasn't necessarily my favorite, but this caught my eye in terms of being surprised and everything that was involved. The blockbuster move that caught my eye was the Houston Texans trading Laramie Tunsil to the Washington Commanders. So clearly Washington was trying to improve the offensive line, the left side specifically, and they went and became big-time players. But the haul they gave the Houston Texans were surprising than anything. A total of 4 picks. 4 picks, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about a second round and a third round, and along with 2 other picks, that's a significant haul for a player that, is a seasoned vet in the National Football League. And then the other surprising end to this deal happening was the Houston Texans. You traded away your best offensive lineman that was a part of a bad O-line unit, but he was the best reliable option you had, and he protected your young quarterback's blind side. So that blockbuster was surprising from either side in terms of the haul the Commanders gave the Houston Texans, and Houston being ready to trade the blind side tackle for their young quarterback. And we know how important that player is to a quarterback, especially for a young quarterback.
So the haul was a 2025 third and 7th, as well as a 2026 second and 4th from the Washington Commanders. And Washington receives a 2025 4th in return as well, along with obviously Laramie Tunsil. So it's a lot.
Just a lot.
It is a lot for a player, but tackles age gracefully usually. You think that guy probably has 4 or 5 years as your starting left tackle. That I think given Jaden Daniels' frame, right? Given how skinny he is, I think you're paying for that sort of that level of play. You're paying for the fact that now he doesn't have to worry about his blind side, and that could be the move that puts you over the edge. So I don't hate it from the Commanders' perspective. I do hate it from the Texans' perspective. It's just like, you went for a quarterback who was so skittish in the pocket last year, because why wouldn't he be? To what's he going to be like now? What's he going to be like now that Blake Fisher's guards blinds or Tyus Howard's flipping over to the left side, which he never played? I don't know.
And Howard was a bookend right tackle. Now you just, hey, go play left. All right.
I don't know.
It's not that easy.
All right. My favorite, though, I like the DK Metcalf move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And yeah, it's expensive. Yeah. Second rounder is a good amount to give up, but it's not what guys were giving up for Devontae Adams. It's not what guys were giving up for Tyreek Hill. And obviously he's not at that level, but DK is your dream scenario of what you could have gotten with a second rounder.
Yes.
Now you have 2 alphas on the outside. And yeah, it's costing you a good amount of money, but this was your problem last year. Your problem was when George Pickens was checked out of games, your passing offense was toast. That's not going to be the case anymore. And it gives you 2 guys who I think fit Arthur Smith's offense. So obviously the quarterback position remains to be seen, but I love that move for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I love it. I'm right there with you.
That's our AFC recap. We will be back tomorrow. Kyle Long joins the show to do NFC recap. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, keep pushing.